Right now, across Europe's eastern flank, something huge is happening. We're talking a massive military buildup. Thousands of troops, tanks, and fighter jets are all training for a war they desperately hope never actually comes. But what are we really looking at here? Is this a confident show of force, meant to keep the peace? Or is it more of a frantic race against the clock, preparing for a conflict that feels more and more possible? Let's dive in.
So we're going to start right where the tension is the absolute highest, NATO's new front line. The activity here isn't just your standard military exercise. No, it's being driven by a real, tangible sense of urgency. And the sheer scale of the forces involved, well, it's something we haven't seen in decades.
And that number right there, 90,000. That's how many people are involved in Steadfast Defender, which is NATO's biggest military exercise since the Cold War ended. It's a number that's absolutely designed to send a crystal-clear message about readiness and resolve.
But okay, beyond the huge numbers and the grand strategy, what's the actual feeling on the ground? Well, this quote really gets to the heart of it. It comes from forces in Estonia, and it just cuts through all the noise. For them, this isn't some abstract geopolitical game. The threat feels real. It feels imminent. It feels close.
And this slide really shows you why that feeling is so immediate. I mean, look at the geography. In places like Estonia, NATO troops are only 90 miles from the Russian border. They're literally training on the exact terrain they might have to defend one day. And you can bet that adds a whole different level of gravity to every single drill.
So how did we even get to this point? I mean, this massive reinforcement of Europe's eastern border, it didn't just happen overnight. It's actually the result of a very deliberate, decade-long strategic shift by NATO. And it's all been in direct response to Russia's actions.
What's so interesting here is how this timeline just lays it all out. You can see NATO's step-by-step response. It really kicks off in 2014, after Russia's annexation of Crimea. Then, a couple years later in 2016, the alliance creates something called the Enhanced Forward Presence. Fast forward to 2022, after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and that presence gets doubled. And now, we're looking ahead to 2025, with new activities like Eastern Sentry getting launched because of even more hostile actions.
And that term, Enhanced Forward Presence, or EFP, you've got to remember that one because it's key. We're not talking about a symbolic tripwire force here. This is 8 combat-ready, multinational battle groups. These are seriously robust forces with heavy armor, and they're designed not just to send a message, but to actually fight if they have to.
And this map just paints the picture perfectly. You can see the incredible scope of this defensive shield. It literally stretches from Estonia up in the north all the way down to Bulgaria and Romania on the Black Sea. It's a totally unified defense, with different allied nations leading each battle group, which really hammers home that core NATO idea. An attack on one is an attack on all.
So what's the actual military thinking behind this shield? Well, officials have a simple phrase for it: repel, don't expel. The whole idea is to have enough force right there on the border to stop an invasion dead in its tracks. Why? Because fighting to regain territory, to expel an enemy that's already dug in, well, that's a much, much harder and bloodier war to fight.
Okay, so let's zoom in from the grand strategy and see how this all works in practice. We're going to look at one key part of the shield, the UK-led battle group in Estonia. This is where the high-level plans meet the mud, the snow, and the cold, hard reality of training for war.
One of the biggest events on their calendar is something called Exercise Spring Storm. It's this huge annual drill led by the Estonians, and it tests a really critical capability. Can they rapidly scale up that forward-deployed battle group to the size of a full brigade? And we're talking about everything from trench assaults to complex maneuvers with heavy hitters like the Challenger 2 tanks, and even the powerful American HIMARS rocket systems.
And this chart just gives you a sense of the sheer scale we're talking about. The UK alone brings over 1,500 troops, but they're just one piece of a much larger puzzle. All told, you're looking at 14,000 personnel from 11 different NATO countries with hundreds of armored vehicles. I mean, it's a massive logistical and operational challenge.
But, it's not just about the tanks and the hardware. The human element is absolutely critical. As one soldier put it, the tough conditions, that freezing cold of a Baltic winter, it actually forges this incredibly powerful sense of camaraderie. You're all in it together, and going through that shared hardship, well, it builds the kind of trust you're going to need in a real fight.
And their mission? It's crystal clear, and the stakes could not be higher. If an invasion were to happen, these troops are expected to hold the line for anywhere from 2 to 10 days. They are the first line of defense, and their entire job is to buy just enough time for the main bulk of NATO's reinforcements to get there.
And that right there brings us to the single biggest strategic question hanging over all of this. Okay, holding the line for a few days is one thing, but is the alliance really, truly ready for what might come next, for the long haul?
Analysts kind of break this problem down into two parts. First question, is NATO ready to fight tonight? And the consensus is, yeah, pretty much. Those high-readiness forces, the EFP battle groups, they're all set up for a short, sharp fight to stop an initial attack. But then there's the second question. Is NATO ready for a protracted war, a long, grinding conflict? And that, well, that's the big unknown. Because a long war isn't just about soldiers. It's about whole societies, about industrial capacity, about having enough ammunition, about resilient supply chains, the whole shebang.
And this whole question is getting more urgent by the day. Why? Because according to intelligence assessments, Russia, despite taking staggering losses in Ukraine, has managed to almost completely rebuild its military back to pre-war levels. And they've done it by putting their economy on a full war footing and getting help from countries like China, Iran, and North Korea.
Now, it's important to remember that all of this preparation, all these exercises, they're based on a very specific narrative about the threat. And it's only fair to point out that some observers are starting to question that narrative itself.
For instance, one commentator, Neil McCoy Ward, basically suggests that the constant repetition of these invasion warnings in the media starts to act like a form of propaganda. His point is, if you hear something over and over again, you just become more likely to believe it, even if it doesn't quite make sense at first.
This viewpoint is really highlighted by this one specific story. A young British rifleman training in Finland was asked what he was preparing for. His answer? To prevent a Russian invasion of Britain. The commentator's reaction was just blunt. That makes zero sense geographically. And the point being made was to show this potential disconnect between the big strategic goals and how the actual mission is understood by some of the people on the ground.
So we're left with this really complex picture, right? On one side, you have this very real, tangible shield of steel and soldiers, all preparing for the absolute worst-case scenario. And on the other, you have these deep, probing questions about the nature of that threat and how likely it really is. And it all boils down to one final critical question for all of us. In this new and uncertain era of European security, what does being ready truly even mean anymore?